That's when I learned, rather, to depend on myself. I was living amongst a very, very upper class, and I still had very much middle class thoughts and sensibilities. True happiness is when you have total control. I've had more control over my life in the last 2 years than I've ever had. Sometimes leaving the United States in order to find your place. Hi, my name is Jeremy Whistine, and I am from the United States. I was born in, several years ago in South Carolina. I grew up in a small town called Clover, South Carolina, only 2,000 people. So to give you an idea of how small my hometown is, whenever I was in high school, we got our first McDonald's. And we were so excited that we finally got our first McDonald's that I was in the marching band. I played saxophone in the marching band. And they asked the marching band to come and play in front of the McDonald's for the opening. And that was a big, exciting thing. So I always tell that story to give people an idea of how small my hometown is. I went to college at the University of South Carolina in Columbia. And after that, I moved to New York. I studied for 2 more years after I graduated from the University of South Carolina at a school called AMDA, the American Musical and Dramatic Academy. Now, music has always been an important part of my life. I studied vocal music, which meant I learned to sing classical music. And as a result of that in college, classical music has always been a part of me, but pop classical music. So one of my favorite recording artists is Andrea Bocelli. You guys in the United States, you'll probably know someone named Josh Groban. I found that he's not as popular here, but I wanted to be just like Josh Groban about 20 years ago. But as a result of singing that kind of music, I had a natural connection with musical theater. So that's what I studied in New York for many years. And I worked in musical theater. I did cruise ships, special events, weddings, things like that, until about 2010. And then I walked into SoulCycle to work at the front desk, and I was then invited by the owner at the time a few weeks later to audition to be an instructor. So I was only at the front desk at SoulCycle for about 4 weeks, and then I went into the training program and became an instructor. And it took me a year. It took me a whole year to really find my place and to find my groove into being a fitness instructor. But afterwards, I enjoyed it and found success. And so I taught at SoulCycle for 4 years while I was still gigging and while I was still performing and singing. So I used to do all of that at the same time. SoulCycle was my day job. For about 2 years, I would teach during the day, and then at night, I would sing and perform at clubs, at restaurants, different events. And then in 2014, I met the CEO of a new startup company in Mexico City. He took my class at SoulCycle, and he invited me to come to Mexico City and be the master instructor to help create this new product, which would be called Síclo, which was sort of presented to me as going to be Mexico's version of SoulCycle. So I accepted the job, and I moved to Mexico City in 2014. And the first Síclo studio opened with me being the master instructor and sort of heading everything at that time in June or July of 2015. And then that's where I met my wife. I actually trained my wife. She doesn't like for me to say that I trained her now because she's very serious and very successful fitness instructor in many different disciplines now. But we started dating later that year. And after Síclo became successful, we made an agreement that I would be there and work there for several more years. And I got married. My wife and I got married in 2019, in May of 2019. And then the next year, COVID hit. And actually, COVID was a good experience for us for us being able to create a scenario for the things that we wanted to do. Without COVID, I don't think we would have ever been able to create the opportunity to move here to Madrid, which we did in 2001, a little over a year after the pandemic outbreak. And I came to Madrid for the first time in 2018, and I immediately fell in love with the city, and at that time I wanted to create a scenario in which I could live here. It took me a few more years to actually make that happen, but once I did, after a short time, in terms of my career as a fitness instructor, I've never been happier, and I really don't think I've been any more successful than I've been at this moment in time. So I want to make Madrid my home. I want to live here indefinitely. I've been saying it for a while, but I want to have children here. We have not had children yet, but hopefully that'll be the next big thing. I feel like there are a lot of things that I still want to accomplish personally and professionally. There's still a lot of things that I want to see, but for right now, I'm very happy and just very content with being here in Madrid. I look back on 2005. That's been what, almost 20 years ago now? 18 years at least. 2005 still remains a challenging year because I think that is, well, that was when I went through my first heartbreak, but we won't get into that. But I really felt like I had finished all of my schooling, and that year I was really on my own. And although at that time I was supporting myself and you know, standing on my own, but that was a particularly lonely time. You know, I was doing performing gigs during the day. I would go and sing and entertain people who were visiting New York during the day, and then at night I would go home by myself and watch TV. And you know, the friends and everyone that I had made during college, we had sort of separated. So that's when you learned, or that's when I learned rather, to depend on myself for my own emotional support and how to, you know, get myself through difficult times, which was something that would be very necessary in the years to come. Although I have a very strong support group now, I found that sometimes I am more comfortable figuring things out on my own, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but I'm always very, you know, independent because I went through that time where I had no choice but to be alone. My family was back in South Carolina, which was hundreds or thousands of miles away. Honestly, my years in Mexico were difficult. It's hard to explain exactly why. I think, you know, that was my first experience living in another country. I had been to New York from South Carolina, so going from a very small place to, you know, the melting pot, one of the biggest cities in the world. Then from New York to Mexico City, which was another difficult move. It was culture shock in many ways, even though Mexico and American culture are very similar in many ways. But where I was in Mexico and sort of the environment that I was thrown in was very different. I was living amongst a very, very upper class, like a very elite group of people in Mexico. And I still had very much middle class thoughts and sensibilities. And it was very fortunate. It was, you know, career-wise, it was the best decision that I had made. So I don't think I was ever got used to dealing with a lot of the challenges that I was going through at that time in, you know, being in a leadership position and being responsible for, you know, sort of being a disciplinary for a certain group of people. But once I got here, I was used to it. This was the easiest move from Mexico City to Madrid. That was the easiest move I ever did. I felt like Madrid was much more like New York, so it felt like I was coming back to familiar territory, and that still is the way that I feel. I mean, I think that in many ways that are good, Madrid is similar to New York, and in many ways, Madrid doesn't have a lot of the bad things that New York has. You can take the subway, the metro here. It's very safe, it's very convenient, it's very clean. You have lots of different eclectic restaurants. I love going to trendy, healthy, health food restaurants, which you had that in Mexico City as well. I feel like right now they're sort of popping up all over the place here in Madrid. And, I love a good kale salad or, anything with kale. I like it, yeah. And brown rice and, all of that. I love it. That's a good question. How do I define happiness? For me, true happiness is when you have total control over your life. And I say this because for many years, I felt like I was in a situation, in a place that I felt like in order to break free from, I would have sort of lost security. So in an indirect way, even though no one was forcing me to live in a certain place, no one was forcing me to be in a certain situation, I felt like if I had made the decision to leave, I would have lost everything that I was working for. So I made the decision to move to Madrid. I stuck strong to that. And not only did I have to fight my employment, I had to do a lot of personal fighting. I had to fight a little bit with my wife. I had to fight a little bit with her family to finally get here. But now I think everyone agrees that it was a good decision. I think we're all very happy with the decision. My mother-in-law, for instance, she's coming back to visit us in a few weeks, and she's going to be here for a whole month. So she loves the city. So to get back to your question, though, happiness is when you are in total control of your decisions, be them good, the right decision, or not. I think that I find happiness whenever I am in total control of my life. I can go wherever I want to go. I can make any decision. And, I guess we're never in total 100% control, but I feel like I've had more control over my life in the last 2 years than I've ever had. And you find even more happiness whenever you make decisions, and then after a while you find that they were definitely the right decisions. The success that I've managed to acquire here professionally and the happiness leaves no doubt in my mind that I did the right things in fighting for making the decisions that I made. I think you can definitely find happiness in success. I don't think that success is absolutely necessary to be happy. I think you can, everyone has their own definition of what success is. I can be, an aspiring housewife and not be a professional, but to raise a successful family, which is very consequential. When you are a housewife and you're not getting paid, you're not out there fighting and competing with people, but you take pride and you take effort and you're very, concentrated on raising a family so that family can then go and be successful. That's a very consequential thing. So therefore you find success. I just think it's all a matter of what the definition of success is that brings you happiness. So I think once you define what your success is for you, and then you pursue it and you succeed at it, then that brings you happiness, I think. I always wanted to be a singer. I grew up wanting to be like Michael Jackson. I never could dance like Michael Jackson, but for so many years, even up until my mid to latter 20s, I was pursuing being an entertainer, being a performer. And I sort of stumbled into fitness. And, when I turned 30, I said, I'm never going to be Ricky Martin, Enrique Iglesias. That's just not going to happen. But that doesn't mean that I have to give up and stop performing and stop doing what I like doing. You just have to be realistic. I don't know. I think there's a higher power, or maybe I just am lucky, or maybe I have good instincts. Maybe it's all three. But I always seem to be ahead of whenever things are about to change. I always sort of get ahead. So I think it's just all about when you stumble upon something and you see that it's working, you just keep going with it. You take the opportunities. As my dad told me once, he says, just take your breaks. When you get a good break, you know, you take it and make the most out of it. And so I think I've been good at taking my breaks. And I'm, you know, I still want to take that. I mean, I've got a lot of work to do, and I got hopefully a lot of life to live. I thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of my life. Thank you for being interested in my story. And this has been very, very cool. I hope that my story has provided some inspiration, you know, for anybody in any part of the world. But if there are any Americans in particular, I want to encourage. I say this because we Americans, we were just talking about this, we Americans, we don't take the chance to sort of go outside and explore the outside world. Of course, the United States is a big country and there's a lot of exploring that we can do within our own country, but, you know, sometimes leaving the United States, my mom and my dad thought I was crazy whenever I moved to Mexico, but now they agree that it was probably the best decision I ever made in terms of a career. So sometimes the thing that might benefit you the most might not be within your current surroundings. Maybe sometimes you need to take a chance and go outside and explore. That would be my advice for anybody, you know, who is sort of stuck and they're trying to figure out their place in this world. Maybe you need to go and view the world and see the world a little bit too in order to find your place.
If you watched the video until now, this is your sign to subscribe.
And if you have any more questions or a completely opposing opinion, write it down in the comments below.
Thanks for watching and see you next week.